I'll never forget the day he left. It wasn't just any breakup, with adult conversation, tears from both sides, and promises of friendship. It was in the middle of my 6-month pregnant belly, pulsing with life, while I was counting pennies to buy newborn diapers before I even needed them. I remember his shirt hanging on the chair, his backpack leaning against the door, my trembling hand on the kitchen table. I remember the metallic taste in my mouth. I don't know if it was fear or bile, when I heard the words that still burn to this day. I wasn't born to be a father. At that moment, it wasn't just the sound of the backpack being dragged, nor the door closing behind him. It was as if someone had pulled the ground out from under me, leaving only the weight of my belly hanging in the void. I stood there, unable to cry, unable to scream, unable to run after him. I just looked at my belly, hard and round, and thought, what do I do with you now? That was it. There was no pretty speech, no sad music playing in the background. There was me, an unbearable silence, and a baby kicking inside as if asking, and now? People think the worst moment is when someone tells you to your face that they don't want to stay. It's not. The worst is what comes after. It's the first night you lie on your side, hug the pillow to support your belly, and realize the whole bed is unusable. It's waking up with your back screaming, reflexively reaching out to the side and finding only a cold sheet. It's going to prenatal appointments alone, holding back tears when the doctor asks, and the father, is he coming to any appointments? And you answer with a dry no that swallows the whole story you don't have the strength to tell. That day after he left, I sat on the living room floor because the chair seemed too sophisticated for someone so broken. I felt the first pang of fear, not in my womb but in my chest. Because that's when the cruel realization hit me. He was leaving with his own things, and I was going to be left with everything he couldn't give back. The belly pain, the sleepless nights, the bills, the enormous responsibility of looking at a human being and knowing that if I fell apart, he would fall apart too, even though he had never set foot in this world. Many people romanticize single mothers as warriors, strong, inspiring. At that moment I was none of that. I was just a woman sitting on the floor, hugging my belly, my face swelling from silent tears, asking the ceiling if God was sure about what he was doing to me. I wasn't angry with him right away. The anger came later. What came first was a paralyzing, almost childlike fear of not being able to cope. Fear of the hospital. Fear of childbirth. Fear of work. Fear of not being able to be what that child would need. I thought about everything in a matter of minutes. I thought about how I was going to pay the rent with only one salary and maternity leave ahead. I thought about what my family would say. We warned you. You were deluding yourself. Men don't hold on to marriages with pregnancy. I thought about the photos I wouldn't have. Gender reveal party with dad holding balloons, my belly being kissed, a family straight out of a commercial. I thought about the questions that would come after. Is he going to document it? Is he going to help? Was it planned? I don't know. But what hurt most at that moment wasn't even the present. It was the future. It was imagining the day my daughter, because yes, I already knew it was a girl, would look at me with those big eyes I didn't even know yet and ask, why don't I have a father? I relived that scene in my head even before she was born. I tried to invent answers, imagine less painful paths, practice phrases, but they all seemed like lies or stabs in the back. I already knew that one day that question would come. I just didn't know that, when it did, I would be both stronger and more tired. That night, lying on my side, my hand flat on my belly, I made 2 silent pacts. The first was with her. I don't promise it will be easy, but I promise you will never feel alone, even when everything else is missing. The second was with myself. You will cry now. You will cry a lot. But tomorrow you will get up. Because the world doesn't pause for someone who was abandoned while pregnant. The electricity bill doesn't wait for you to recover. Hunger doesn't show any compassion. The birth doesn't reschedule because the father disappeared. Life doesn't negotiate with your exhaustion. If you've listened this far, if this beginning touched something in you, do one thing for me and especially for yourself. Like this video and subscribe to the channel. It's not just about numbers. It's a signal to the algorithm that single mother stories also deserve to be told, heard, and shared. And comment "I'm here" if, in any way, this door that closed in my life resembles one that has already closed in yours. Sometimes we don't have hugs, but we have comments that keep us grounded. Because what I didn't know that night when he left carrying his own backpack was that the hardest part was yet to come. It wasn't the abandonment during the pregnancy. It was everything that came after. The birth, the loneliness, the first night at home with a newborn in my arms, and years later the phrase I most feared hearing, "Mom, why don't I have a father?" If you want to know how I got to this point and what I answered her, stay with me. The story is just beginning. The days after his departure didn't come on a calendar. They came in waves. There were days when I could get up, shower, make the bed, and even pretend life went on. There were days when the simple act of brushing my teeth felt like a marathon. My belly grew as if nothing had happened, as if my body hadn't received the news of the abandonment. My daughter kicked, moved, had a party inside, and I felt a strange guilt for not being able to enjoy that moment like the maternity photos on Instagram. While other women were having photo shoots on the beach, I was doing calculations in my mental spreadsheet. Rent, electricity, water, food, baby supplies, childbirth. Going to prenatal appointments became a mix of relief and silent humiliation. The waiting room was full of couples discussing baby names, debating nursery colors, laughing at strong kicks. I sat in a corner, holding my bag with both hands, trying to appear invisible. Sometimes, the doctor would casually ask where the father was, if he couldn't come to an important appointment. I would reply with a short no that carried a whole text behind it. He didn't want to, he left. He chose not to see his own daughter in even one ultrasound. But I didn't have the energy to explain that every time. So I just said no and swallowed the rest. The nights were the worst. The insomnia of pregnancy mixed with the anxiety of abandonment is a combination that no one romanticizes. I would lie in bed with a heavy belly, my body aching, and my mind racing in circles. I thought about the birth, about who would hold my hand. I thought about the hospital, about filling out the form, about the blank father space. I thought about going home, about the first night with a newborn, about that noisy silence I already felt even before arriving. Sometimes I would run my hand over my belly and apologize to it, as if it were my fault for choosing the wrong man. The truth is, for a while, I even tried to justify what he did. I thought maybe he was scared, maybe he'd been raised without a father too, maybe he was lost. I told myself stories to soften the weight of the word, coward. But every time I touched my belly and felt my daughter respond with a kick, those justifications crumbled. Everyone has fears. Had them too. The difference is that fear was never an excuse for me to leave. I started organizing the baby's layette on my own. I didn't have a decorated room, an expensive crib, or a huge gift list. I had a used stroller I bought from a neighbor, some clothes on sale, and a strong desire to at least ensure my daughter had the basics. I hung the mini dresses on the wardrobe door, and every time I passed by, I looked and thought, it's just going to be the two of us, and this has to be enough. It was a mantra I repeated more to convince myself than out of genuine belief. My body, in turn, began to pay the price for the emotional strain. My blood pressure fluctuated, my sleep was fragmented, and my spine felt like it was breaking in two. There were days when I felt a shortness of breath that wasn't just physical. It was the sensation of slowly sinking, with no one around to lend a hand. I would get up to go to work 6 months pregnant, take crowded buses, endure the judgmental stares of people who thought I knew nothing, and return home late, with swollen feet and the certainty that if I stopped, everything would crumble. I remember one particular night when I sat on the edge of my bed, picked up an old notebook and started writing. It wasn't a diary entry, it wasn't a letter to him. It was almost a contract with myself. I wrote, "Are you scared? Are you alone? But from now on, you no longer have the right to give up." Not because I wanted to be a hero, but because I was no longer just me. There was someone inside me who didn't ask to be there and who needed an adult on the outside, even if that adult was crumbling inside. If you're listening to this and somehow that feeling of a heavy belly and an even heavier heart seems familiar, feel free to comment below. I understand. It's not about inflating numbers. It's about another single mother reading this and realizing she's not the only one struggling to stay afloat. And if you haven't already subscribed, do it now. This channel is specifically for people who live this kind of story and often don't have anyone to talk to. When you subscribe, you're not just helping the video, you're helping this conversation reach those who need to hear it. What I didn't know while counting the kicks in my belly and the days until delivery is that the real test wouldn't be enduring the pregnancy alone. It would be facing the postpartum period with a broken body, a baby in my arms, and an entire house on my shoulders. And years later, when I thought I had already survived the worst, came the question that froze everything inside me. Mom, why don't I have a father? But before that sentence, there was a day that marked the beginning of everything. The day I entered the maternity ward without anyone by my side. And that's what I need to tell you about now. Entering the maternity ward alone is a feeling that no one prepares you for. People talk about the fear of childbirth, the pain, the anesthesia, the cesarean section, the natural birth. But no one talks about the moment you arrive at reception with your bag on one side, your hand on your belly on the other, and realize that there's no one walking beside you. I remember the smell of the hospital, the overly bright light, the distant sound of other babies crying. And I also remember the receptionist asking, with the utmost naturalness, "A companion?" I swallowed hard and replied, "No." Signing the papers was almost more painful than the contractions. There was my full name, my ID, my address. And in the father section, a giant void that seemed bigger than the form. I could have put his name, of course. Biologically, he existed. But presence isn't written with ink. I looked at that blank space and understood that the absence wasn't just emotional. It was going to become a document, a birth certificate, a record. My daughter was going to arrive in the world with an officially recorded whole on paper. In the delivery room, I lay on that cold stretcher with a mixture of dread and relief. Dread of not being able to cope, relief at least knowing that the wait was ending. When the team asked if I was nervous, I could only laugh humorlessly. It wasn't nervousness. It was the feeling of being about to cross a threshold alone, carrying someone who had never seen the light. While they inserted an IV in my arm, monitored my heart, adjusted my position, I thought, you deserve someone holding your hand, and that someone is me. Even if I'm trembling. The moment I heard her cry for the first time was the most contradictory scene of my life. While a part of my heart felt relieved, another part tore open. It was as if with that cry she was asking, "I'm here. Who's there for me?" And the silent answer was, "Only me, daughter. But I promise I'll do everything I can to make this enough." They brought her to my chest, wrapped up warm, with that smell of the beginning of the world. I looked at that tiny, slightly crumpled face and felt a flood of love mixed with pure fear. 'Cause now it wasn't just theory anymore. She existed. It wasn't "my daughter will be born alone" anymore. She was born. And she was there, breathing, totally dependent on me. When they took us to the room, the contrast was painful. On one side of the hallway, rooms with people laughing, grandparents taking pictures, a father applying hand sanitizer, relatives bringing flowers. From mine, only the sound of the stretcher wheels and my own thoughts screaming. I entered a silent room. They placed the crib next to the bed. And suddenly it was just me and her. The room seemed too big, too empty, too cold for two people so newly arrived in that configuration. My first night in the hospital was my real test. No nurse around all the time, no one asking if I needed water, no one to take turns holding her when she cried. She would cry, I would get up with my body still aching, stitches throbbing, my chest starting to fill. I would pick her up, adjust her, take a deep breath and think, there's no one I can pass this baby to for 5 minutes. If I wanted to go to the bathroom, it was with her in my arms. If I wanted to drink water, it was with her supported in one arm and the cup in the other. There I understood in practice what it meant to be the only adult available. Sometime in the early morning, exhausted, leaning against the edge of the bed with her breastfeeding, I looked at the ceiling and sent a message to the universe. Look, I don't know if I'll do everything right. Probably not. But if there is any justice in this world, may she at least never doubt that she was loved from the very first minute. even if I'm scared, even if I'm broken. Because love isn't the absence of fear. It's what we choose to do even when trembling. At the end of the day, another blow came, leaving the hospital alone with a newborn in my arms. While some mothers were being carried on someone's shoulder, with cameras filming, with cars waiting, I slowly descended the ramp, feeling the city much noisier than I remembered. The sun seemed too strong for her skin. The world seemed too hostile. I settled her in my lap, got into the ride-sharing car, and on the way home it finally hit me. There's no going back. From now on, it's you for yourself and for her. If everything I'm telling you reminds you of someone or of yourself, don't keep it to yourself. Comment below if you also went through a birth without a companion, a lonely postpartum period, or being discharged from the hospital holding the world in your arms. Sometimes reading Me Too is the difference between a mother moving forward or feeling like she's failing. And if you haven't liked it yet, now's the time. It's the simplest way to say, keep going, I'm listening. What I didn't imagine returning home with her in my arms was that the loneliness of the hospital would repeat itself, in other forms, in endless nights, on feverish days, at school meetings, on holidays. And later on it wouldn't be about me anymore. It would be about her noticing what was missing. The hardest blow wasn't the day he left. It was the day his absence finally gained a name in her mouth. And to understand how we arrived at this cutting question, why don't I have a father? I still need to tell you how it was to learn to be a mother, a woman, and a provider, all at the same time, with a baby who knew nothing of the chaos into which she was born. The first week at home with a newborn should come with a giant warning. This isn't the life you know. This is survival in slow motion. My daughter cried at a volume that seemed impossible for such a small body. I woke up every 2 hours to breastfeed, and each awakening was a lie, because I didn't even really get to sleep. It was more of a long blink interrupted by a sharp, piercing cry that made my body automatically jump up before my mind even understood where it was. In the first few days, I still tried to maintain some semblance of control. I washed my face, tied my hair back, changed my clothes. But as the nights piled up, it all crumbled. I started living in a milk-stained nightgown, my dirty hair haphazardly tied up, dark circles under my eyes so deep they looked tattooed. And the worst part, there was no one to say, "Go rest, I'll stay with her." There was no shift work. I didn't have an hour off. It was me 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, without breaks, without weekends, without holidays. There's one night that will forever be etched in my memory. It must have been around 3 in the morning and she was crying non-stop. I had just finished breastfeeding, changed her diaper, done everything the basic manual says to do. But she kept crying. I tried holding her, rocking her, music, a warm bath. Nothing worked. And there, holding her in my arms, pacing back and forth in the tiny hallway of the apartment, I felt my body begging for mercy. My legs trembled. My lower back throbbed. My arms burned. And for the first time I thought something horrible that filled me with guilt instantly. I wish someone would take her away from me for 5 minutes. It wasn't a lack of love. It was literal exhaustion. The kind that makes you forget if you've eaten, if you've drunk water, if you've gone to the bathroom. I found myself crying along with her, both of us there, crying in unison, and I felt like the worst mother in the world for not knowing what to do, for not being able to calm my own daughter. That's when a very harsh realization hit me. Maternal loneliness isn't just emotional. It's physical, sensory. It's the feeling that your body is being used without rest, and yet it's not enough. The house quickly descended into chaos. Dishes piled up in the sink, dirty laundry overflowing in the hamper. The floor I couldn't remember the last time I'd mopped. I looked around and saw the mess growing, and a voice inside me said, "Clean this up. You can't let it turn into a pigsty." But my body replied, "With what energy? With what time? With which hand?" Because one hand was always holding it, the other was trying to do 1,000 things at once. And sleep. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. There were days when I opened the refrigerator and realized I hadn't eaten anything but biscuits and reheated coffee. There were days when I left the house wearing my nightgown under my street clothes because I simply forgot to take it off. There were days when I went to take a shower and sat on the shower floor, letting the water fall, and there I cried everything I had held back since she was born. I cried from exhaustion, from loneliness, from not knowing if I was doing it right, from being afraid of failing. But you know what's scariest? In the midst of all this exhaustion, I couldn't talk much about it. Because if I said I'm tired, the comments would come. But didn't you want to have a child? You knew it was going to be hard. Every mother goes through this. Yes, every mother does. But not every mother goes through it alone. And that difference weighs heavily. It weighs on the body, the mind, the heart. Because it's one thing to be tired and have someone to share it with. It's another to be tired knowing you have no one to pass the baton to. Not even for a minute. I started having intrusive thoughts that terrified me. Thoughts like, what if I faint and she falls? What if I fall asleep breastfeeding and accidentally suffocate her? What if I have a meltdown and can't take care of her? These weren't the thoughts of someone who wants to give up. They were the thoughts of someone who is at their physical and emotional limit and knows that, if something goes wrong, there's no safety net. If you're listening and recognize this overwhelming exhaustion, this guilt of not being able to cope, this loneliness even when you're with someone all the time, do one thing. Comment below, I felt this. Because there are mothers reading this comment right now, thinking that only they are weak, only they can't handle it, only they cry secretly in the bathroom. And they need to know that it's not weakness. It's overload. And if you haven't liked it yet, do it now. Because this video only reaches those who need it if the algorithm realizes it matters. And comments, likes, subscriptions, all of that is fuel for the message to reach further. I didn't know during those endless nights that my body would continue to demand payment for years. That the exhaustion would become chronic. That I would learn to function on autopilot, even when everything inside me screamed, stop. But I also didn't know that, even exhausted, I would continue. That, even feeling like I couldn't go on anymore, I would. Because that's what single mothers do. They don't choose to be strong. They are forced to be, because stopping isn't an option. And it was like that, amidst the chaos and sleep deprivation, that I learned a hard truth. I might be broken, but I wasn't going to break. At least not yet. Over time, the routine fell into a kind of organized chaos. I knew more or less when she nursed, when she napped, when the crying would come without warning. But, while on the outside it seemed like I was managing, inside I felt like I was always one step away from collapsing. It was during this phase that another issue began to weigh heavily. The money issue. Maternity leave ending, work calling, bills due, refrigerator emptying. And in the midst of all this, a baby who didn't understand anything about bills to pay. Only hunger and cuddles. I remember the first time I had to choose between buying colic medicine for her and finishing the monthly grocery shopping. I stood in the pharmacy aisle, phone calculator on, comparing the price of baby drops with the cost of rice and beans that were on my mental list. It's the kind of choice no mother should have to make. But single mothers know this cruel math well. It's all either/or. Either you pay for this or you pay for that. Either you buy diapers or you recharge your bus pass. Either you eat right or you secure formula if breastfeeding isn't enough. Going back to work was like giving birth without anesthesia. I left her with whoever I could, however I could, in whatever arrangement I managed to put together. A neighbor who agreed to look after her for a few hours. An acquaintance who agreed to watch her while I rushed to my shift. A favor exchanged for lunch or cleaning. Every time I closed the door leaving her behind, still so small, a piece of me remained stuck to that makeshift bed. I walked down the street with the feeling that I had forgotten an arm at home. At work I tried to appear functional. I laughed at lame jokes, attended to clients, answered emails, pretended that little being at home didn't occupy 100% of my mind. But as soon as my phone vibrated with any notification, my heart raced. Is she okay? Is she crying? Did she nurse? Did someone remember to change her diaper on time? I was physically in one place, emotionally in another. And yet, the world demanded productivity, goals, a smile on my face. The feeling of hunger changed its meaning. It wasn't just the physical hunger of someone who often forgot to eat, or ate whatever was available standing up between tasks. It was a hunger for care. A hunger for affection, for me too. A hunger for a hug that would say, "I know you're heavy, let me hold you for a bit." But, in practice, that didn't happen. There was the recommendation of "take care of yourself" from someone who was going to sleep 8 hours. There was "you're strong" from someone who never had to choose between diapers and gas. One day, coming home from a long shift, I opened the front door and found my daughter asleep with a full tummy, the sheets slightly crooked, and one little hand still holding the end of her favorite toy. At that moment, the whole world went silent. I sat on the edge of the bed, gently ran my hand through her hair and thought, that's why. It was for that peaceful sleep, for that full tummy, for that small body lying in a minimally safe place, that I was grinding myself down. But I won't lie. Along with that tender moment came a harsh thought. What if one day she grows up and thinks this isn't enough? That I failed? That I should have given more? Guilt in single mothers doesn't need a reason to appear. Feeds on any opening. If I was working, I felt guilty for being away. If I was at home, I felt guilty for not earning money. It was never enough. It never seemed good enough. And this feeling drains an energy that is already scarce. Amidst all of this, I began to realize something else. I had ceased to exist as an individual. I was the mother of... At the health clinic, at work, in the family. My name seemed to have been swallowed by the paper. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman I didn't fully recognize. While I felt proud of holding everything together alone, I also felt a kind of mourning for the person I had been before. The one who could sleep without an alarm, who could take a long bath without fear of someone crying, who could spend money on frivolous things without carrying the weight of a life on her shoulders. If you're listening to this and somehow feel that same hunger, not just for food but also for being cared for, leave a comment below saying, I exist beyond being a mother. It's not selfishness, it's a reminder. Sometimes, just writing this helps you start to reclaim a part of yourself that was buried under diapers, bills, and exhaustion. And if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe now. Because this kind of conversation doesn't happen just anywhere. And the more people hear, the harder it will be for society to pretend we don't exist. What I didn't realize during that period when the hunger for everything was intense was that, as my daughter grew, the lack would shift. It wouldn't just be in my body and mind anymore. It would start to appear in her eyes. In the drawings she made, in her games, in her comparisons with other children. And one day, this lack would emerge in the most direct and cutting form possible. A simple, almost innocent question, but capable of opening all the wounds at once. Mom, why don't I have a father? My daughter grew up like all daughters do. Too fast for someone who's tired, too slow for someone in a hurry to see the difficult phase pass. The first months turned into years. The babbling became words. The wobbly steps turned into running around the house. And in the meantime, his absence ceased to be a recent event and became background noise. He wasn't there. Period. There was no message, no call, no belated gift on a special occasion. It was as if the world had decided that her role as a father had been ripped from the script with no possibility of rewriting. At first, she didn't realize it. For her, the world was me, her favorite blanket, and a few toys scattered around the living room. She had no frame of reference. She didn't know that some children had 2 adults at home, one on each side. For her, normal was my voice, my hands, my lap. But children grow up. And the world enters through television, the street, school, the playground. I started to notice that when a Father's Day commercial came on TV, she would become quieter. Her gaze would linger a little longer on those rehearsed scenes of fathers playing in the park, teaching how to ride a bicycle, receiving gifts made of colored paper. In the park, while I was pushing the swing, she would discreetly point to other pairs. Child and father, child and mother, adult and adult. Sometimes she would say, "Look, Mommy, the girl's father is pushing too." It was just a comment, no accusation, no demand. But inside, each of those phrases carried a weight. I smiled and agreed, but inside I felt as if I owed her something I never had the chance to give. The drawings began to reveal what she still couldn't say aloud. When the school asked her to draw her family, she made a simple drawing, her and me. 2 figures holding hands, hearts above. The teacher commented, all innocent. She didn't want to draw her father? I took a deep breath and replied, she drew the family she knows. It wasn't about not wanting to. It was about not having. The blank space on her paper seemed like the same emptiness I had seen in the father field of her birth certificate. As her vocabulary grew, the questions began to take shape, though still timidly. One day, while we were putting away toys, she blurted out, "Mommy, who made me?" I laughed inwardly at the depth of her emotion. I explained, in the simplest way possible, that I had been chosen to be her mother, that she had grown in my belly. She placed her little hand on my now flat belly and asked, "And was I big?" I said no, that I was tiny. She laughed. The conversation remained light there. But I knew that, at some point, this question would have a part two. And part two came in the form of a comparison. One day, coming home from school, she said, "Julia's father picked her up today. He's tall. He carries her backpack for her." And then she fell silent, looking out the window. Waited. I didn't want to force words into her mouth. After a few minutes, she came, almost whispered, "Why doesn't my father ever come to pick me up?" My chest tightened. I swallowed hard, changed the subject slightly, talked about something else, and out of cowardice didn't answer at that moment. Sometimes, we also make mistakes trying to protect ourselves from pain that doesn't have an easy answer. I started mentally preparing myself for the question I knew was coming. I practiced it in my head, in the shower, washing dishes, going to work. I thought of phrases that wouldn't place all the blame on him, but also wouldn't force me to invent a hero he never was. I didn't want to create hatred, but even less did I want to create illusion. Children sense when we lie to protect them. And lies never truly protect. They only delay the impact. If you're listening to this and have already gone through the why phase with a child, especially regarding an absent father, comment here, "I know how it hurts." This isn't about sharing your story if you don't want to. It's for another mother to read and feel that this burden isn't solely on her shoulders. Sometimes, knowing that someone else has also had to look into a child's eyes and explain the inexplicable is already a relief. And if you haven't clicked subscribe yet, do it now. Because this conversation about absent fathers, guilt, and explaining things to children doesn't happen everywhere on the internet. Here at least you won't hear it alone. The silence of his absence echoed within our home. He wasn't mentioned every day, but he was there. In the empty chair, in the only pair of children's shoes by the door, in the single bed we shared for so long. I thought I was controlling the narrative, that I could keep pushing the issue aside like I did with so many other things. But children have their own timing. They don't ask when you're ready. They ask when their pain overflows. And the day their pain overflowed came in a way I'll never forget. On a random late afternoon, with a cartoon on TV, a pencil in hand, and the phrase I feared most, "Mom, why don't I have a dad?" It was a Saturday afternoon. I remember it with a painful clarity. My daughter had just turned 5. She was sitting on the living room floor, drawing something her mind had invented, focused in the way only a child can be. I was beside her, folding clothes that had just been taken off the clothesline, those autopilot tasks we do without thinking. The TV was on, showing some cartoon, the noise filling the comfortable silence of the house. Everything so normal, so everyday that I couldn't imagine that, in a few minutes, my life would stop. She put down her pencil, turned her face to me with those big eyes and asked, without alarm, almost casually, "Mom, why don't I have a dad?" My hand froze in the middle of my t-shirt. The air left my lungs as if someone had punched me without warning. I knew the instant she finished speaking that this was the moment I had tried to postpone, rehearse, avoid. But it arrived. And it doesn't warn you. It doesn't wait for you to be ready. Simply arrives. I took a deep breath, dropped my clothes, and sat on the floor at her level. I didn't want to be on top of her, unintentionally intimidating her. I needed to be eye to eye, heart open, voice firm, even though inside I was trembling. She looked at me with that piercing innocence of someone who just wants to understand, without malice, without accusation. Just a child wanting an answer about her world. And the answer she needed involved an absence that even I couldn't properly explain to myself. "You have a father, sweetheart," I began, trying to choose each word carefully. "Everyone does. But your father, he's not here." She frowned, processing. Why? I knew this sequence was coming. Children aren't satisfied with half answers. They want details, they want logic, they want a reason. Because he chose not to stay. He left before you were born. She was silent for a few seconds, fidgeting with her fingers, looking down. Then came the next question. Was it because of me? That sentence almost destroyed me. I held her face firmly in both hands, looking deep into her eyes, and spoke slowly with all the certainty I had. No. Never. You didn't do anything wrong. You don't push anyone away. Whoever leaves chooses to go. You are a reason to stay, not to leave. I saw her little eyes well up with tears, but she didn't cry. She swallowed her tears the way a child does when trying to be strong. And that broke me even more because I recognized. She was doing to me what I did to her. Holding back from collapsing in front of the one she loves. Does he know I exist? She asked. Yes. Does he know my name? Yes. Then why doesn't he come to see me? And there was the question I didn't know how to answer without lying or hurting her. Because the brutal truth, because he didn't want to, was too cruel for a 5-year-old. But making up excuses would teach her that absence can be justified. I chose the most honest middle ground I could. Sometimes people aren't ready to be what they should be. And that's not the fault of the one who's waiting. It's the problem of the one who left. She looked at the drawing she had made. It was her, me, and next to it, a little stick figure she had half erased. My heart broke again. I drew him here, she said, pointing to the somewhat blurred space. But then I erased it because I don't know what he looks like. I held back tears in front of her. Because in that second I understood the magnitude of the wound. She was trying to include someone she had never seen, in a space that should have been naturally filled, but was just empty. I pulled her onto my lap, pressed her against my chest and said, "You don't have to draw him if you don't want to. But if you want to, that's fine too. What I want you to know is that our family isn't smaller just because there are fewer people. We are complete. In our own way." She stayed quiet, leaning against me, and after a while asked, "Do you think he thinks about me sometimes?" I wanted to shout, "I don't know, I have no idea, and if he does think about me, why has he never shown up?" But what I said was, "I don't know, daughter. But I know I think about you all the time. And you'll never have to doubt that. If you've ever had to answer this question, if you've ever looked at your son or daughter and seen the pain of someone's absence transforming into words, comment here, 'I understand this pain.' Because this conversation needs to be said more often. It needs to leave the private sphere and occupy public space, so that no mother thinks she was wrong in her answer or that she could have done things differently. And if you haven't liked it yet, do it now. Because this video only reaches those who need it when we show the algorithm that it matters. And believe me, it matters. Each like is a vote saying, this deserves to be seen by other mothers. After that conversation, my daughter didn't bring up the subject again for weeks. She went back to playing, watching cartoons, being a child. But I knew something had changed. She had named the absence. And that meant that, from then on, she would start processing it in other ways. There would be days when she would look at other parents and feel the absence. There would be moments when she would question why she hadn't been as lucky. And I would have to hold her hand through each of those moments, even when I myself was still trying to understand how to cope with my own pain. After that day, the question was no longer just the phrase, "Why don't I have a father?" It began to appear disguised in other forms, in small comments, in silences, in lingering glances at family scenes on TV or at the school gate. Her pain no longer came like a lightning bolt, but like a fine drizzle. Constant, cold, insistent. And I needed to learn to see that rain even when she said nothing. At school, assignments like Family Day, Father's Day, and Who Lives With You began to feel like emotional tests disguised as educational activities. One day, she came home with a drawing where all the other children had drawn their father, mother, house and dog. Hers was simple. A crooked house, her and me in front, holding hands. The teacher wrote above it, with the best of intentions, "Me and my mommy." I felt both proud and sad. Proud because she had accepted our reality so naturally. Sad because I knew that, somewhere deep down, she still wanted to complete that picture. At the school gate, when other parents arrived, I could feel it in her body. She would shrink a little, squeeze my hand tighter. It wasn't blatant envy. It was a painful observation like, look, that exists too. One day, a classmate asked loudly in front of her, "And your father? Does he never come to pick you up?" She froze. She looked at me as if pleading for help without opening her mouth. I answered first calmly. "She lives with me. Only with me. And that's okay." The girl insisted. "But why?" I could have unleashed my frustration right there, but I held back. Because every family is different. Ours is like this. Later at home, my daughter asked me, "Is it wrong to be only with you?" I answered without hesitation. "Wrong would be if you had no one. And you have someone. You have me." Her father, by his own choice, remained absent. No messages, no audio messages, no belated birthday wishes, nothing. Sometimes I wondered if he was curious to know how she was, if he thought about her on some sleepless night, if he saw any child on the street and felt the weight of what he had left behind. I never got an answer. And, as much as it hurt to admit, I needed to learn that this answer wasn't my responsibility. My responsibility had brown eyes, a crooked smile, and a pink backpack on its back. Her questions matured over time. They stopped being, "Why don't I have a father?" and became, "Why didn't he want to stay? Do you think he likes me? If I ever meet him, what do I say?" Each of these questions came like a sharp knife, but I refused to use them to cut further. I answered with the truth possible for her age. I didn't sugarcoat it, but I also didn't rub salt in the wound. I would say, "He didn't know how to be a father, but that says nothing about you. It says something about him." I repeated this until it almost became a prayer. There's a scene I'll never forget. We were watching a movie where the father appeared to save his daughter in a difficult moment. She sighed and said, "He's like a superhero, isn't he?" I replied, "In the movies, yes." And she, without taking her eyes off the screen, said, "In real life, you're the superhero." I laughed, a little awkwardly, a little emotional, because I never wanted to be a heroine. I just didn't have a choice. But hearing that from her so spontaneously was like a bandage on a part of my chest that was still open. If you're hearing this and also experience this absence in the little things, at school meetings, presentations, other children's questions, write in the comments, "I raise my child alone but not in silence." We need to break this idea that single motherhood is a private matter, a hidden problem. It's not. It's a reality in many homes. And if you haven't liked this post yet, now's the time. It seems silly, but it's this gesture that makes this kind of story visible to other women who today think they are the exception, when in fact they are part of an invisible multitude. As time went on, I realized that her question about her father was just the tip of the iceberg of something much bigger. The search for understanding her own worth. Because in a child's mind, logic is cruel. If he didn't stay, was I not worth it? And then, more than talking about her father, I needed to talk about her. To remind her every day in detail that she was loved, wanted by me, that she wasn't leftovers, that she wasn't a plan B. And this reconstruction doesn't happen in one conversation. It happens over years. Every time you look into her eyes and say, "You are enough," even if he was less. For a long time, my daughter processed her father's absence with a silent, almost resigned sadness. She didn't demand anything, she didn't yell, she didn't make a scene. But the anger, when it arrived, came like a hurricane. And I wasn't prepared to see that storm inside her. It was on an ordinary day, during a silly argument about something I don't even remember anymore. She was nervous, I was tired, and suddenly she yelled, "You can't say anything, you're not two people. You're only one person." And then, more quietly, with tears in her eyes, "If he had stayed, you wouldn't be alone all the time." That hurt more than anything he had done to me. 'Cause until then I thought I was protecting her. But, at that moment, I understood that his absence also hurt her in a concrete way. It wasn't just about her missing him. It was about her carrying the weight of me being overwhelmed. As if, somehow, she felt responsible for me not having help. I sat with her, held her face in my hands, and said slowly in a firm voice, "I'm not alone. Have you? And you are not a burden. You are the reason all of this is worthwhile. Don't confuse things." But the anger kept surfacing. Anger at the father she never saw. Anger at not having what other children had. Anger at me not being able to give her everything she wanted, even when I was killing myself trying. One day, she drew a figure and scribbled all over it. I asked who it was. She answered, "Him." She didn't need to explain. He knew. He was the only him who occupied that kind of space in her life. The scribbled figure was the way she found to scream without yet having the voice to do so. I didn't know whether to let her feel angry or try to soften the blow. Was encouraging anger fueling hatred? Was denying anger invalidating what she felt? I sought help. I talked to a psychologist, I read, I asked other mothers, I tried to understand. And the most honest answer I found was this: children have the right to feel what they feel. My role is not to correct her feelings. It's to teach her not to let those feelings take over everything. So I did the following. Every time she spoke angrily about him, I listened. I didn't interrupt, I didn't say, "Don't talk like that." I didn't defend him to appear balanced. I let her talk. And then at the end I would ask, "What do you need now? Do you need comfort? Do you need to cry? Do you need to go out to distract yourself?" And depending on the answer, I would do it. Because her anger was legitimate. He deserved that anger. But she didn't deserve to carry it alone. There was a moment when she asked me, "If he ever shows up, will you let him see me?" That was like walking on glass barefoot. Because the truth was, I didn't know. Part of me wanted to protect her from yet another possible disappointment. Another part knew that if he really changed and wanted to show up, maybe she deserved the chance to meet him, even if it was just to clear up doubts, to close a chapter. But I answered honestly, "If he really shows up responsibly, we'll talk. But nobody will force you to do anything. You decide if you want to or not." She fell silent. Then she said something that surprised me. "I think I wanted to see him once. Just to understand why he didn't stay." That made me realize that her curiosity wasn't about having a father. It was about understanding her own story. She wanted to look into his face and search for something that would explain the inexplicable. And despite my fear, I understood that this was her quest, not mine. If that ever happened, I would be there, holding her hand, ready to cushion any fall. But I wasn't going to deny her the right to try to find her own answers. If you have a son or daughter who feels anger towards an absent father or mother, comment here. I also deal with this anger. Because many mothers think they are doing something wrong for not knowing how to handle this type of feeling. And the truth is, there's no manual. There's only us, trying to do the best we can with what we have. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Because this channel is about that. Talking about what nobody talks about, but that everyone who experiences it feels. Her anger didn't disappear. She learned to live with it, to understand that it was part of the story, but it didn't have to be the whole story. And me. I learned that protecting isn't about taking away the pain. It's about being present when the pain comes. 'Cause it did come. In waves. In sleepless nights. In questions that returned with different words. But with each wave I was there. And that, in the end, is what made the difference. Time passed, and his absence ceased to be a novelty, becoming a scar. Still hurt when touched. It still bothered me in certain situations. But it no longer bled all the time. My daughter grew up knowing that a biological father existed somewhere. But that family wasn't a surname, it wasn't DNA. It wasn't mandatory physical presence. Family was who stayed. Who held her hand. Who said, "I'm here," even when everything fell apart. My daughter had just turned 8 when something changed. It wasn't a formal conversation. It wasn't a significant event. It was a subtle but profound change. The kind that only those who spend every day with her notice. She stopped asking about her father with the anxiety of someone expecting a different answer. She stopped looking at the door as if, perhaps, he were going to appear unexpectedly. She stopped looking for justification for abandonment. And instead, she began to look at me with a new understanding, almost too mature for her age. We were sitting on the couch, watching some silly TV, when she turned to me and said out of the blue, "Mom, I think I understand." I paused what I was doing and looked at her. "Understand what, honey?" She took a deep breath, as if gathering courage to say something she'd rehearsed for ages. "I understand that he didn't leave because I wasn't enough. He left because he wasn't." And right there in that second I knew something had healed inside her. Not completely, because the wound of abandonment doesn't close all at once. But enough for her to stop placing the blame in the wrong place. I hugged her tightly, swallowed the tears that wanted to escape and said, "It took you 8 years to understand this. It took me much longer." And it was true. Because for a long time I also carried the guilt. I thought I had chosen wrong, that I should have seen the signs, that maybe if I had been different he would have stayed. But no. His absence was never about me. And it was never about her. It was about him. About his inability to take responsibility, to look at his own child and decide to stay. From that day on, she started talking about the subject differently. When someone asked about her father, she would answer naturally, "I don't have contact with him. I live with my mother." Without shame, without drama, without that weight she had before. And that, coming from her, gave me a lightness I didn't know was possible to feel. Because, in the end, what I wanted most wasn't for her to have a present father. It was for her not to feel less for not having one. She had a school assignment, a free topic, in which she wrote an essay called "My Mother, My World." The teacher called me in for a chat because she thought the text was too emotional for a child that age. When I read it, I cried right there in the coordinator's office. She had written, "My mother works a lot. She gets tired. Sometimes I see her crying when she thinks I'm sleeping. But she never lets me lack anything. She's both mother and father at the same time. I know that's tiring. But I want her to know that I notice. And that, when I grow up, I'll take care of her too." That broke me and rebuilt me at the same time. I didn't want her to feel obligated to reciprocate. I didn't want her to carry guilt for my being tired. But, at the same time, I understood that she was telling me something important. She saw. She recognized the effort. And that, in itself, was a form of love that I didn't know I needed. If you're a single mother and your son or daughter has reached the stage of understanding, verbalizing, and looking at you with gratitude mixed with pity, comment here. He sees everything. Because sometimes we think we're hiding it well. That the exhaustion doesn't show. That the struggle is invisible. But it's not. They see it. And when they grow a little, they speak. And that's when we realize. It was worth it. Every sleepless night, every bill paid with difficulty, every swallowed tear. It was worth it. And if you haven't liked it yet, do it now. This video is about us. Mothers who fight silently. And each like is a way of saying, "I saw you too." My daughter started helping me in small but significant ways. She tidied her own room without me asking. She put away the dishes. She hugged me when she noticed I was tense. One day she made me breakfast in bed. Crooked, burnt, but made with so much love that I ate every piece of that stale bread as if it were a feast. And when I asked her why she had done that, she replied, "Because you deserve it, Mom. You always do everything alone. Today I wanted to do it for you." I knew at that moment that despite everything, despite the abandonment, despite the struggle, despite his immense absence, I had succeeded. He hadn't given me everything I wanted. I hadn't been perfect. But he had been present. And presence, in the end, was all that mattered. She didn't grow up with a father by her side. But she grew up knowing she had someone who would never leave. And that's no small thing. That's everything. The question, "Why don't I have a father?" that once almost destroyed me, ceased to be an open wound and became part of our story. Not a happy part, but a real part. And reality is what builds a real person. My daughter didn't grow up deluded, but she also didn't grow up bitter. She grew up knowing that life isn't perfect, that people fail, but that true love remains. It always remains. And if one day he shows up, if one day he knocks on the door wanting to meet, to explain, to ask for forgiveness, the decision won't be mine. It will be hers. Because she already understood what she needed to understand. She already healed what could be healed. And if she wants to open the door, she will open it knowing exactly who she is. The daughter of a woman who never gave up. And nobody can take that away from her. Looking back, I realize that my daughter's question, "Why don't I have a father?" wasn't just about him. It was about identity, about belonging, about trying to understand why her life seemed different from most. And, in answering her, I also had to answer some questions for myself that I had been avoiding for years. Did I do everything right? Could I have done things differently? Will she blame me one day for choosing him? The answer to all these questions, I discovered, is the same. It doesn't matter, because making mistakes is part of it. Making the wrong choices is part of it. What defines us isn't the mistake. It's what we do afterward. And what I did afterward was stay. It was getting up every day, even exhausted. It was putting food on the table, even when the bills didn't add up. It was hugging her when the whole world seemed hostile. It was showing in practice that love isn't a pretty promise. It's a raw, unfiltered, tired but firm presence. I learned that single motherhood isn't about being strong all the time. It's about being weak, breaking down, crying in the bathroom, and still going back into the living room to make dinner. It's about not having all the answers, but giving the answer you can in that moment. It's about not being perfect but being consistent. And consistency, I discovered, is one of the most powerful forms of love that exists. I also learned that guilt is a companion to all of us. Guilt for working too much. Guilt for not having quality time. Guilt for not being able to give what other children have. Guilt for feeling angry at him. Guilt for sometimes feeling angry at her too. But I learned to differentiate guilt from responsibility. I am responsible for taking care of her, for guiding her, for being present. But I am not guilty of abandoning another person. And that liberates. Takes time to liberate, but it liberates. I learned that society romanticizes single mothers as warriors, but forgets to ask if we want to be the war. No, I didn't. I wanted partnership, shared burden, a shoulder to lean on during bad days. But since I didn't have that, I went with what I had, myself. And I discovered a strength I didn't know existed. Not because I was special, but because there was no other option. You discover what you're capable of when the alternative is to crumble with a child in your arms. I learned that external validation is just crumbs. People will tell you that you're amazing, that you're an example, that you're strong. But when you need concrete help, a hand to hold your child while you go to the doctor, a loan to pay a bill, those same people will disappear. And that's okay. Because what sustains us isn't internet praise. It's the very conviction that you're doing the right thing. And you are. If you're listening to this and recognize yourself in any of these lines, if you've ever cried from exhaustion, if you've ever felt guilty for things that weren't your fault, if you've ever wondered, am I doing this right? Let me tell you something, you are. It may not seem like it. It may not show visible results every day. But the simple fact that you're here, listening to this, seeking answers, trying to improve, is already proof that you care. And those who truly care don't fail. Comment here, I'm doing the best I can. This isn't empty self-help. It's a reminder you deserve to hear, even when no one else says it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe now. Because this is a space for you not to feel alone. And you're not. I also learned that my daughter doesn't need a perfect life. She needs a real life with truth, with boundaries, with affection, with presence. And that's what I gave her. Not in a magazine-worthy way. Not in a sponsored post-style way. But in a way that fit our reality. And it was enough. She's living proof of that. When I look at her today, I see someone who knows what struggle is but also knows what love is. Someone who understands that not everyone stays, but that those who stay matter. And that's a lesson that many people with complete families never learn. I finally learned that his absence left a mark. There's no denying it. But that mark doesn't have to be destiny. My daughter can grow up and choose never to speak of him again. Or she can grow up wanting to search, understand, confront. Whichever path she chooses, I will respect it. Because this story, in the end, is hers. I am the narrator of part of it, but she writes the ending. And I trust that, with the foundation I gave her, she will know how to write with dignity, even if with pain. Life hasn't become easy. It hasn't turned into a fairy tale. There are still bills to pay, physical exhaustion, and mental worry. But one thing has changed. I stopped waiting for someone to come and save me. I stopped looking at the door imagining he would return. I stopped placing her happiness, or my own, on variables I don't control. I took control of what I could control. My presence. And that made all the difference. Sometimes I imagine what it will be like when she's older, and maybe that question will come back in a different way. No longer why don't I have a father? But how did you endure all of this alone? Do you regret anything? If you could go back in time, would you do things differently? And I know that when that day comes, I won't have a prepared speech. I'll have scars. And it's from those scars that I'll answer. If she asks me if I regret having her, I'll answer without blinking. Never. I regret believing him, yes. Closing my eyes to signs that now seem obvious. Thinking that love was enough to hold on to someone who never wanted to be held. But not her. She was the only huge success amidst a decision full of mistakes. If she asks me if it hurt doing everything alone, I'll say it hurt in places I didn't even know existed. In my body, in my mind, in my soul. And yet, if I had to go through it all again to have her, I would. If she asks me if I hated her father, I'll take a deep breath and tell the truth. There was a time when I did. A time when I wished he could feel half of what I felt. A time when I wanted his conscience to weigh so heavily on him that it kept him awake at night. A time when I wondered how someone could sleep peacefully knowing they had a child in the world they'd never even met. But I'll also say that, over time, that hatred lost its power. Not because he changed, but because I chose not to let it live inside me forever. I needed that inner space to love her the way she deserves. Without shadows. And if she asks me if he deserves a second chance, I'll be honest. That's your decision. I can tell you what I went through, what I felt, what I bled for. I can tell you where he failed me and you. I can remind you of all the nights he wasn't there, of every birthday when the chair was empty. But, in the end, forgiveness, if that's the case, is yours. The meeting, if it happens, is yours. The choice to open that door or not is yours. Because the life he abandoned wasn't mine. It was yours. I only held on until you could decide for yourself. If she asks me if I was happy, I'll say that happiness wasn't a place I lived. It was a series of moments I learned to see amidst the chaos. It was her first toothless smile. It was her little hand, stained with paint, offering me a drawing that said, "I love you, Mommy." It was the tight hug at the end of a day when everything went wrong. It was her look of pride when I came home tired from work and she said, "You did it, Mommy." Happiness wasn't the absence of problems. It was the presence of meaning. And that, thanks to her, I had. If you've made it this far, listening to every part of this story, it's because it somehow resonated with you. So do one thing for me and for yourself. Like this video now, subscribe to the channel, and share it with a mother you know who carries the weight of the world on her shoulders and sometimes feels like she's failing. Sometimes all we need to keep from collapsing is to hear that we're not alone, that someone has already felt exactly this mix of fear, love, anger, exhaustion, and still kept going. Ultimately, if one day she looks at me and asks what this whole story meant, I want to be able to answer like this. It meant that, even after being abandoned 6 months pregnant, I chose to stay. It meant that, even without knowing how, I found a way. It meant that the question, "Why don't I have a father?" never had an answer that fixed everything, but it served to help us build a truth together. A father is the one who stays, who cares, who takes responsibility. And when that was lacking, I was here. Whole or in pieces, but here. And that's what I want her to take with her through life. Not everyone who should stay, stays. Not everyone who promises, keeps their promises. But the love that truly matters isn't the one that never fails. It's the one that, even when it fails, comes back, repairs, persists. Failed many times. I yelled when I didn't want to, I got lost in thought, I almost gave up in silence. But the next day I was there again, making coffee, getting her uniform ready, braiding her hair before school. And it's in this repetition, in this daily "I'm here," that the answer she needs most resides. You didn't have a father, but you were never without love.